All right, let's wait another couple of minutes because we usually have a few stragglers, at least at our end.
David, did you make me co-host?
Yes, you are co-host. You're welcome to share your screen.
Okay.
Co-hosts are, let's see, yourself, Avril Gatoff is always my backup, and my other screen. I got two screens running, so my other screen.
Okay, that's great.
Sorry, I just got great news now. I passed the audition that I did about 10 days ago for a show in Bet Yad Labanim in Tel Aviv. It'll take place in March.
Can't wait.
Yeah, well, we have to rehearse. 3 months is a rehearsal period for a show like that.
What do you do?
I'll be singing and dancing and some monologue.
Wow.
I've done it before. I did it 10 years ago in a show for TACT, Tel Aviv Community Theatre.
Chanukah Gelt.
I'm an actor.
Any free tickets going?
No free tickets. I don't know what the tickets will cost, but there are no free tickets.
Well,
but it's worthwhile money. It'll be worthwhile money seeing this show, I tell you.
What's the show called?
It's called Miscast.
Hello.
Okay, just to let everybody know the way we use these programs.
Hello.
Hang on.
We just saw the Queen. We went down to,
Okay, the way we do these programs at Young Israel anyway is that we mute everybody to begin with without the ability to unmute yourselves so that the speaker is not disturbed unless you want interruptions or interaction during the speech. But generally speaking, people prefer to talk, and then we open it up at the end for comments, questions, anything else that anybody else wants to say. But during the actual presentation, everybody is muted. Only the co-hosts can unmute themselves at will. So that way we maintain complete silence from background noises. Okay, it's 7:33. Okay, let's start. For those who don't know me, I'm David Feiler. I'm the sort of Zoom coordinator for Young Israel. And we have this weekly Malava Malka on Zoom during the whole winter time period before the clocks go back again or go forward. Obviously, this is a replacement for what the sorts of activities we used to have in Shul live. We used to have a Suda Shishit every week, but now we have a Malava Malka every week on Zoom. Okay, our speaker this evening is Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Lieberman. And a quick bio for those who don't know him. He was born in Manchester in 1959, qualified as a doctor in 1982. I'm sure a number of you here, at least in Young Israel, had him as their GP during their Manchester years. He was a GP there for over 30 years. He also qualified as a Moel in 1990. That's a convenient combination of Miksorot, of professions. He's been lecturing on Jewish medical ethics for many years. He's been specializing in recent years on medical halakha, studied under Professor Avram, who's a well-known Jewish medical ethics and halachist. His Sefer Nishmat Avram. It's like the standard book on this topic. He has a smicha in his retirement years. He earned a smicha in 2019 here in Israel. And he has a particular interest in developing a dynamic approach to halachic problems by innovating and interpreting halacha in accordance with modern society. And of course, the Tchelet program is very much his focus of attention these days, as you can see from his background on his screen. It's an educational outreach program which is very active. I mean, I get WhatsApps and emails all the time from Tchelet. I hope that you all had an interesting little nacht last night, 24th of December, because his topic is Christmas and the Jews, a barometer of society. Okay, Rabbi Lieberman, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. David, can you hear me okay, everybody?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. Okay. First of all, let me share with you a little thought. There you go. Happy Christmas-ka. A bit strange thing to see. I'd never seen that before, but there you go. And we will see as we go along that this is quite a popular approach to Christmas, to merge it with Hanukkah and have a happy Christmas-ka. So we'll just stop that sharing for the moment and perhaps come back to that a little later on. So there were 3 little boys who were sitting in this classroom, first day back after the Christmas holidays, and the teacher walks into the class and she sees the 3 little boys sitting at the front. There's Patrick, the little Catholic boy, there's Billy, the little Protestant boy, and there's Moshe, the little Jewish boy. So she says, Patrick, how did you spend Christmas? So he says, well, miss, we went to midnight mass, and then in the morning when I woke up, there was stocking at the end of my bed filled with toys, and I played with them. And then we went to mass again, and we came back and we had Christmas dinner. And then we opened up all our presents, and I got lots of toys up from underneath the tree. And then I played with the toys all afternoon. And my parents said, oh, thank you, God, for Christmas. And so she then said to Billy, the little Protestant boy, and how did you celebrate Christmas, Billy? And Billy said, well, we didn't go to midnight mass, but we did go to church in the morning. And I did get lots of toys in my stocking at the end of my bed. And then after we had Christmas dinner with all the turkey and the trappings and all the stuff like that, I sat and I played with all my toys. And my parents stood by and beamed on and said, oh, thank you, God, for Christmas. And what about you, Moshe? She says, how did you celebrate Christmas? So he says, well, miss, we didn't go to midnight mass and we didn't go to church in the morning, but we got up very early on Christmas morning and we went to my father's toy factory and we looked at all the empty shelves and my parents said, thank God for Christmas. So, you know, Christmas can be looked at in very many different ways. But for much of the world, December the 25th is the time to celebrate the birth of Jesus. But for Jews, it's actually a time to consider one's relationship with the wider society. And it's an interesting sociological experiment to look at the Jews' response to Christmas over the centuries and millennia. And actually, by doing that, we can see how the world sees us and how we perceive the world. And if you look over time, we can see almost every different type of reaction, ranging from some Jews choosing to take on the entire Yuletide festivities with all their trappings, as they say. And that could be for a number of reasons, as we'll see as we go along. On the other hand, there have been other Jews who have absolutely and emphatically rejected all the rituals and symbols of Christmas in a rather Scrooge-like way. And yet others have sought to meld Christmas and Hanukkah together and to make Christmas-ka, as we saw on the screen share just a few minutes ago. So Christmas, in effect, has become a prism through which Jews can view how the fact that we live amongst the nations of the world, or have done for the majority of our history, has shaped our culture, even our religion, and certainly our identity. So let's start, for example, with Christmas in Europe. Now, for centuries, the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe were very, very fearful of Christmas time. At most other times, you'd find religious, pious Jews would be studying Torah in the shul, because in those days it was difficult to find money to have lighting in your own home. So most of the religious Jews would go to shul every night, and they would study the Torah in the shul itself, but not on Christmas. There was no studying of the Torah in shul on Christmas. They were frightened of being attacked in the streets, so they took refuge in their homes. And what happened was they would play chess or cards or something like that with their families. And this began the concept in the way of Nittelnacht, which David mentioned a few minutes ago. And I'm going to come into that, talk about that in some detail in a few minutes. But for many, many years, for centuries, Christmas, along with Easter, was actually a time of great danger for Eastern European Jews. And it was a time of terror too. Christians would often turn on Jews who lived in their midst. And of course, they would blame them for killing Jesus. And they would often attack and even kill the Jews with total impunity. It was like open season on the Jews. Christmas and Easter were the times that Jews were very, very fearful of this accusation of killing Jesus. I remember my father, Zichrono Livracha, who was actually the only Jewish boy in a Catholic school of hundreds. He told us that he was regularly taunted with the chants of "You killed our Lord." And he was fond of saying that he used to tell them, "Nah, it wasn't me, it was the Leeds boys." But this was something that he had to suffer, and particularly at Christmas time and Easter time. And throughout Jewish history, December the 25th has seen some very, very low points indeed in Jewish life. And in order to understand this, we actually need to go back before the origins of Christmas even, to understand where some of the Christmas customs, not so many of the modern ones, but some of the more ancient Christmas customs came from. And many aspects of Christmas actually grew out of an ancient celebration of the Romans called Saturnalia, after the god of Saturn. And during this time, the ordinary moral rules of society were sort of suspended. And it was a kind of time when morals were relaxed, and things that you wouldn't normally do or wouldn't normally be allowed were allowed and came into being. And for example, if you think about the customs at Christmas in offices and workplaces, that you find there that at the Christmas do, the bosses and the workers, they mix in a way that they wouldn't normally have mixed. The normal rules of society are all suspended for a little while. People get kissed under mistletoe and all that kind of stuff. And all this comes from originally the Saturnalia holiday, where ordinary moral rules were suspended. And in the days of the Roman Empire, this was a particular time when Jews were often taunted. And one popular pastime during this time was actually to force Jews to run naked through the streets of Rome for the amusement of the populace. And this would occur on December the 25th. And these practices actually continued right up to into fairly modern times. As late as 1836, the Jewish community of Rome sent a letter to Pope Gregory XVI, begging him to stop the abuse of the Jewish community on Christmas. And during that time in Rome, rabbis were forced to put on sort of clownish outfits and run through the streets. Baruch Hashem, they weren't made to do it naked, but they were made to put these clownish outfits on. And the spectators, the Christians there, would throw throw articles at them. This was a Christmas pastime as late as 1836. The Rome community tried to stop this. Pope Gregory, however, in his wisdom, refused to intervene. But going back a little earlier than that, the Middle Ages were a particularly difficult time. And this was largely due to the religious fervor and extremism, which was whipped up by the Crusades, a particularly nasty time of history for Jews. For example, on December the 25th, Christmas Day on 1100, Baudouin de Boulogne, the son of a French count, was crowned King of Jerusalem after a wave of bloody crusaders rampaged through Europe. And on their way, of course, the crusaders attacked and massacred Jewish communities by the dozen. And then when they reached the land of Israel, they killed thousands of not only Jewish, but also Muslim residents in their religious fervor. 1312, on December the 25th, anti-Jewish riots broke out in many of the Germanic lands. In 1369, King Frederick III of Sicily passed a decree on Christmas that all the Jews in his kingdom had to wear a special red badge at all times. And I don't have to tell you that that was a forerunner of many further infamous badges of dishonor that Jews have had to wear in this course of history, ending, of course, with the infamous yellow star of the Nazis. That began on Christmas Day. In 1881, Jews were blamed for a stampede in a crowded Warsaw church. What they were doing in a Warsaw church, I have no idea, but they were blamed anyway. And on Christmas Eve, after the Jews were blamed, in the violence that came afterwards, Christian mobs rampaged through the streets of Warsaw, attacking and killing Jews for 3 days in a massive Christmas pogrom. Many Jews were murdered, Jewish women were raped, and over 1,000 Jews lost their homes and businesses. In more modern times, the Christmas season has been linked to anti-Jewish sentiment as well. The Ku Klux Klan, I can never say that horrible word, the KKK, I'll call it because it's easier, was actually established on Christmas Eve in 1865. And of course, throughout the years, it's terrorized and killed countless Jews, not just African Americans, but Jews have also been targets of the KKK. There was a lynching of a Jewish businessman in Georgia in 1915, a man called Leo Frank. That was thought to be the work of the KKK. And after that, half of Georgia's 3,000 Jewish residents left and fled the state. On December the 24th, Christmas Eve, 1959, that's even in my lifetime, I was just a little couple of months old. In Germany, in West Germany, 15 years only after the end of the Second World War, a shul in Rundstrasse in Cologne was daubed with a swastika with the words Juden raus, Jews out. And that sparked an entire wave of Jewish hate in West Germany. It was almost a replica of Kristallnacht. Shuls were desecrated and Jews received death threats. This was just 15 years after the Holocaust, and this centered around Christmas time. So, given that the Jews have been, inverted commas, guests in the various countries that they've found themselves over the centuries, and given that largely they were pretty unwelcome guests for most of the history, not surprisingly, when you have this sort of potent mix of religious fervor, like the Crusades, alcohol, always stokes the fires, and time off, leisure time. People have got nothing to do, they're off work around Christmas time. The Jews knew it wasn't going to be fun. This was a time that they often dreaded. back in history. So what should they do about it? What did they do about it throughout history? Well, many Jewish communities responded by actually instituting rules of their own community, which basically minimized their exposure. They kept themselves to themselves. They hunkered down. They bunkered up during the Christmas season. For example, even Jewish schools, which would normally not be closed on Christian holidays, they closed on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, not because they recognized the holiday, but for the safety of the pupils. And many Eastern European, particularly Jewish communities, actually prohibited their members from going outside at all on Christmas in case they were attacked. So Jews stayed indoors with their windows and shutters closed and basically hoped for the best. Well, of course, this didn't work because this just wound the locals up even more, because what they assumed was not that the Jews were indoors cowering in fear of their lives, of what was going to happen, but they assumed that the Jews were actually indoors doing all sorts of satanic things, you know, sticking pins into little Marys or burning effigies of Jesus, or generally plotting the downfall of the world. So it actually made it worse. Throw a few bottles of 100-degree proof vodka into the mix, and you know, you've got a pogrom in the making there. So this was a difficult time. Other Jewish customs became associated with Christmas Eve, particularly, and Christmas Day. David mentioned Nittelnacht. Jews used to stay up all night on December the 24th. One of the reasons was they were worried that their homes were going to be attacked or burned. Not that staying up could actually mean they could do anything about it, because they couldn't, but they stayed up anyway. And in many communities, people adopted the custom of not learning Torah that night. Lots of different reasons for that, which we'll come on to in a few minutes. But one of the things was they were frightened that passers-by would see the light on, and again assume that there was some fiendish Jewish plot going on, that there were cabals of Jews behind the doors at night and closed doors on this holy night of theirs, plotting to destroy the world, and then they would decide to attack the home. Another custom that arose during this time was the reciting of the Aleinu L'Shabeach prayer out loud on December the 25th, in a way to sort of ward off danger. Because what do we say in the Aleinu L'Shabeach prayer? We say, Shehem mishtachabim v'hevel v'rik, they bow down to nothingness, and we are critical of other religions during that prayer. Actually, some of that prayer, of course, that bit that I just quoted, you won't find in some prayer books because it was taken out for exactly that reason, because people were frightened that if we left it in, it would be seen that we were anti-Christian and we would ask for trouble. And there was a Yiddish proverb became well known during this time, and it sort of summed up the danger that many Jews felt during the Christmas season. And this Yiddish proverb was, Niti, we'll come back to that in a sec, Niti is a Beiseleid, or Christmas is a severe burden. It's a tough time. And Niti is the same word as Nittelnacht. Everyone, you will know what Nacht is. Nacht means night, of course. Nittelnacht was Christmas Eve. Now, the word nittel probably derives from the Latin word natalis, which is the same root of the word, of course, as nativity, which is obviously a word associated with the birth of Jesus. Those of you who were not like me, fortunately, but those of you who went to non-Jewish junior schools will, of course, have been privy to the nativity play, which was always put on at that time of year. So nittel probably comes from natalis, from the Latin. Another possible origin, although I'm not particularly impressed with it, I think it's less likely, is from the Hebrew word nitle, which means hanged, as in somebody who is hanged, who's dead or going to be killed. This was a term which was used in medieval times to refer to Jesus. Of course, it's not thought appropriate to use Jesus's name. We've talked about this in one of my shiurim this week. Actually, he is often referred to as Oisai Ish, that man. Not to use his name. There's no real problem with actually using the word Jesus, because that was just his name. Yeshu, that was just his name. The problem is the second word, Christ, which implies the Savior. So in Hasidic circles, this idea of Nittelnacht had some very specific customs. It's really quite ironic, isn't it, that the day of the year, which is so holy to the Christians, had specific minhagim in the Hasidic community. I find that rather a delicious sort of irony in a way, although the customs come in a rather negative way. It sort of strikes me as being a little ironic that the Hasidim have their own minhagim for Christmas Eve. And as I mentioned earlier on, one of the strangest customs of all on Nittelnacht is not to study Torah at all. I find that it's ironic, really, isn't it, that the one day of the entire year, or the one night of the entire year where no Torah is learned, is Christmas Eve. Even on Tisha B'Av, we're allowed to learn certain parts of the Talmud, the parts that deal with the destruction of the temple, things that deal with mourning and things like that. But on Nittelnacht, no Torah is learned at all. They spend the time playing games and playing chess and things like that. And there are various reasons that were given as to why Torah was not learnt. According to one opinion, that Christmas Eve, they stayed up all night with family and friends, singing, dancing, and playing games. And this was to avoid a visitation from the dead, because it was thought that the undead Jesus walked the earth on Christmas Eve. And apparently, he wouldn't come and visit you if you were singing songs and playing games. You had to be in a certain state of holiness and what have you. If you were having frivolity and singing songs and playing games, then the undead Jesus would not come and visit you. That's also ironic, isn't it? Because the Christians today spend their time on Christmas singing songs and playing games. They probably don't realize that that's keeping Jesus away, according to that custom. There was also a custom amongst the Hasidim to eat garlic. Garlic apparently wards off these marauding hordes of undead people that are wandering around. So you would find in those Hasidic times, probably wasn't very pleasant. Everybody was gobbling garlic and playing games and singing songs. And this is how they celebrated Nittelnacht. But there was one text which some people did study. It wasn't Torah, but they were allowed to study this text, these people who kept Nittelnacht. And it was a book which was not part of the canon. It's not part of Tanakh. It was called Toldos Yeshu. Don't know if any of you have ever heard of this book, Toldos Yeshu, the generations of Jesus. Yeshu is the Hebrew word for Jesus. And it's thought to have originated in around about the 11th century. And it's an alternate history of Jesus. And it is not very flattering at all. It speaks about, it's a collection really of accounts of Jesus's illegitimate birth and his deviant behavior. And it was one of the most widely spread works in medieval Ashkenazic culture to read this Toldos Yeshu on Christmas. And it really reflected the disdain that Jews had for the Christian origins. And really this has right up until my childhood and youth, this disdain has continued. I'll come back to this in a minute, but I certainly recall in my younger years not being able to even refer to Christmas. It had to be called Christmas. It was very disdainful. We were disdainful of the Christian festival, and this told us Yeshu was a reflection of that. Another reason given for not learning Torah on Nittelnacht was that Jews wanted to avoid any kind of enjoyment on that day, when the arch enemy, as it were, which was the Christians, at least in Europe at that time, the arch enemy was celebrating their Messiah's birthday. We certainly didn't want to have any kind of enjoyment. This was a day not of celebration. It was a day of mourning almost. It's a bit like Lahavdil. You see in some places in hardcore Naturi Carta areas on Yom Ha'atzmaut, you'll see signs on the shops that say Sagor Mipnei Avelut, closed because of mourning. They're mourning because of the state of Israel was born. It was a similar sort of idea here in Nittelnacht. We didn't want to have any kind of enjoyment on this day when celebrates the birthday of Jesus. And on the same idea, sex was also off the agenda on Christmas Eve, on Nittelnacht. There was no sexual relations allowed. Again, similar to Tisha B'Av, which is a day of mourning. But there was an added issue on Nittelnacht, and that was that nobody wanted to conceive a child on such a terrible day, on a day when it doesn't really make sense, because if you're going to say that this was Jesus's birthday, which it wasn't, but let's say you're going to say it was, you really ought to ban the sex 9 months earlier so that he wouldn't conceive on the day that he was conceived. But I suppose that was probably a bit more difficult to work out. So there were no sexual relations on Nittelnacht. And it's interesting that even till today, there's one particular group of Jews who still keep Nittelnacht in quite some significant way, and that's the sort of more hardcore Chabad Lubavitchers. And this is based on an utterance by the fifth Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber Schneerson, who lived in the latter part of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, died in 1920. And he said the following, and I quote, this is a translation, of course. Whenever we study Torah, we generate spiritual flow and positive energy. On this night, the powers of impurity are extremely strong. And being that they are extremely strong, if we generate extra holy energy, instead of it being a positive influence on the world, unholy forces can grab it, and then it will be used to strengthen the unholy. So because of that, the fifth Rebbe was very keen that Torah study didn't go on Nittelnacht. Now, if you go to Chabad headquarters in Crown Heights in New York, you will see that on Nittelnacht, the students there in the yeshiva, they don't have a Seder, they cancel study, and they hang around and they play chess. And there actually is a picture, so very unconfirmed on when it was, but there's a photograph of the Rebbe, the last Rebbe, Rabbi Nachum Mendel Schneerson, playing chess with his father-in-law, who was the sixth Rebbe, the one after Shalom Dov Ber, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Yosef Yitzchok Schneerson. There's this picture of the two of them playing chess together. And people want to say that actually that was taken on Nittelnacht because that's the only time that they would have been Mevatel Torah and they wouldn't have been learning Torah together. They were playing chess. It's not confirmed that that was on Nittelnacht, but that's the thought. So, and in fact, even very recently, my son, who was in Gateshead Yeshiva in, I suppose, the early 2000s, he told me that when he was in Gateshead Yeshiva, there were a significant number of Bochurim there who did not learn on Nittelnacht, and they played chess instead. So This was a remnant, if you like, of the Nittelnacht ideas, which began, as we said, in the times of when Christmas was a tough time for the Jews, particularly in the medieval years and the years where Jews felt that they were not particularly welcome. Now, all of this was centered around Eastern Europe and the medieval Western European period of the Crusaders. But in later times, after the medieval period, the story was very, very different in Western Europe. Because there, for the Jewish elite, for those Jews who considered themselves to be the big knackers, the Christian holiday symbols, such as the Christmas tree, for example, for them, this was important. This signified their inclusion into secular society. This signified that they were part of the secular world, part of the non-Jewish world that they wanted to be part of. So you found that many affluent German Jews, for example, often posed for portraits with their extended families, much like you probably saw, I heard Hazel mentioning just before the Queen's speech. I also had a quick look at it tonight. You see there, when she did her Queen's speech, you see it pans out to pictures of the Queen's family sitting there in front of their Christmas tree. Affluent Jews would do the same thing. They would pose for portraits with their extended families in front of these elaborately decorated Christmas trees. And this was common. A Viennese socialite by the name of Fanny Arnstein, who was the co-founder of the Music Society of Austria. She was one of the among the first Jews to introduce a Christmas tree into her home. And this was something which was practiced by none other than the father of modern Zionism, Binyamin Zeev, otherwise known as Theodor Herzl. In fact, after Herzl had completed his seminal work on Zionism in 1895, he was a magnet for all sorts of visiting dignitaries, and important people came to visit him. And there was a senior Viennese rabbi. I'm not sure if he was the chief rabbi or he was a ganzer knacker anyway. A chap called Rabbi Guderman visited Theodor Herzl in his home during the month of December. And there are photographs of this historically very significant meeting with a Christmas tree in view. It's true, I'll accept that Rabbi Guderman was not impressed, and Herzl himself wrote the following, I quote, "Guderman seemed upset by the, inverted commas, Christian custom. Well, I will not let myself be pressured. I don't mind if they call it the Hanukkah tree or the winter solstice." And that was Herzl, Theodor Herzl. Another example, in Berlin, the great scholar of Jewish mysticism, a man by the name of Gershom Scholem, who later came to Israel, he grew up in a home that celebrated Christmas. And he wrote that in his home, and I quote, "We had roast goose or hare." Goose can be kosher, hare is not. "We had a decorated Christmas tree, which my mother bought at the market by St. Peter's Church. We had a big distribution of presents for the servants, relatives, and friends. I even had an aunt who played the piano, treated our cook and servant girl to Silent Night, Holy Night." So this was in Berlin in the enlightened times of the early part of the 20th century. Now, Scholem believed that these celebrations reflected the view that Christmas was not a religious festival, but it was a German national festival. And so as Jews, we could join in this celebration, not as Jews, but as Germans. And this was the way to demonstrate that we were Germans and that we were part of secular society. Sadly, as we know, this attempt by late 19th century and early 20th century German and Austrian Jews to ape their Christian counterparts in an attempt to be accepted by secular society failed, and failed spectacularly, and sadly did not prevent them from joining their less national, less German brethren in the concentration camps and the gas chambers. And so we move on in our sociological journey to the further west still. We've moved from Eastern Europe to Western Europe. Let's go further west and let's have a look at America and how Christmas has been dealt with by Jews in America. Now, looking at American society in general, as early as 1870s, Christmas in America began to change from what was initially essentially a religious festival to what it is today, which is a secular national holiday. And of course, this whole process was accelerated by the commercialization of the world and television advertising and the custom of giving presents and what have you. But in the early days, some Jewish families, notably in New York and San Francisco, Baltimore, places like that, they staged their own celebrations on the night of Christmas Eve, which incorporated both Christmas and Hanukkah symbols, a bit like the screen share that I showed you earlier. I'm going to show you some more screen shares later on, which incorporated both symbols of Christmas, a Christmas tree, and a Hanukkah, maybe a Chanukiah. And it made no difference whether Hanukkah was earlier than Christmas, as often it is, or whether it was at the same time or rarely after Christmas. Made no difference. Christmas and Hanukkah were merged into one. They decorated trees, they exchanged gifts, they had flowers and stockings and all sorts of things. And to continue the German tradition, from the 1880s right up to the beginning of World War II, it was a custom amongst American Jews of German descent that they would have big parties and they would host balls, which would have dinner and dancing and a concert. And this would not be for Christians, this would be for their Jewish friends, and it would take place on Christmas Eve. And I quote to you a report from the Sinai congregation of Chicago's celebration of Hanukkah, as reported in the December 27th, 1878 issue of Chicago's newspaper, The Jewish Advance. And it says like this, and I quote, "The fine temple was crowded with grown people and children. The Hanukkah tree was brilliantly illuminated with wax candles. The services commenced with the singing of the first stanzas of the Hanukkah hymn by the Sabbath school children." And in a similar vein, an edition of the a Sabbath Visitor, which was a popular Jewish children's magazine of the time, there was an article called "On Last Christmas," which describes a Jewish family's celebration of Hanukkah. And the home decorations, listen to this, it's amazing. The home decorations included pictures of Moses and George Washington. It would have a menorah covered with flowers and the liberal use of wreaths and evergreens and hollies. So you can see that in America, things of Christmas and Hanukkah started to be merged very early on. And then perhaps the most widely appropriated Christmas custom that the Jews took on and have taken on and continue to take on is that of giving gifts. We have our own minhagim, of course, of giving at Hanukkah time, and that was Hanukkah Gelt, which I'm sure all of you have heard of, probably received when you were little, and have absolutely no doubt of given to your children and grandchildren over the years. But its origin is not so well known. Actually, the origin of Hanukkah Gelt begins in 17th century Polish Jewry, where the Cheder teachers were appallingly paid, if paid at all. And at Hanukkah, the small children who went to Cheder were given money to give to their teachers. Hanukkah Gelt was originally meant not for the kids, but for the teachers. As time went on, the children said, well, you know, they didn't give it to the teachers, they kept it for themselves. They wanted their money themselves. And of course, the teenage boys soon came for their share as well. According to the Magen Avraham, who was 18th century posek, it was a custom that poor yeshiva students would go to the homes of rich Jewish benefactors on Hanukkah, and they would get money on Hanukkah. They would get Hanukkah Gelt. And the rabbis approved of this, largely because it got money for the yeshivas, but also because it helped to publicize the story of Hanukkah, which of course Pirsuma Nisa is the most important thing of Hanukkah. Over time, probably in an attempt to prevent jealousy of Jewish children for their Christian neighbors, the custom of giving Hanukkah Gelt changed to giving Hanukkah gifts, which, in line with the rest of society, have become more lavish and extravagant with time. I can't tell you the kind of nonsense that I'm sure you've got the same that my grandchildren have said they want for their Hanukkah presents. But there you are. That's what's happened. So we've appropriated that from the Christmas minhag. So that's what went on in America. Now, in the UK, as with most things, we tend to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit slower to catch on than our American counterparts. And I remember, and I spoke about this just a few minutes ago, I remember as a kid at Prestwich Jewish Day School, that Christmas wasn't even allowed to be mentioned by name. We had to call it Christmas. I'm not sure. I tried to look this up, by the way, the origin of Christmas and what actually this means. I don't know if it has a real meaning at all. Maybe when we've finished, if anybody can tell me the etymology of Christmas, I'd be very delighted. I couldn't find anything. But either way, it was a derogatory term. It wasn't something that was said in a pleasant way or even a respectful way. Later on, I came across another term which was again used in a derogatory manner to describe Christmas, and that was Chogah, a term based on the word Chag, festival, and Chogah, of course, was their festival and not ours. Having said that, as time went on, things in Anglo Jewry also relaxed, and although having a Christmas tree wasn't common, it wasn't entirely unknown. It might have been referred to as a Hanukkah bush, but they did exist, albeit in a minority of Jewish homes. I remember being told by Reverend Leslie Oldsberg, Zichrono Livracha, who was a very well-known minister and teacher in Manchester. I remember him going speaking at an event, referring to a time when he went to teach a bar mitzvah boy, and he had to do so in front of the Hanukkah bush, and he wasn't impressed. But what did occur, though, was a definite change in the general approach to Christmas, even in what I'll term United Synagogue type homes. The English people will know what I mean by that. Christmas dinner with turkey, even with crackers, Christmas pudding and all the bits and bobs, has become a not uncommon occurrence. And I guess this stems from the general influence of outside society, particularly TV advertising, of course, plus the fact that it's a time when people are off work, and it's a time when people can have family get together. But even this is not universally welcomed. I've got a friend who deliberately will only eat beans on toast on Christmas Day in protest at what he calls the Christmasization of his Jewish circle. There's a lady called Andrea Samuels. I don't know if she's joined us here tonight. She said she might. She's ex of Manchester. She now lives around the corner from me here in Ramat Phaleg. She's a journalist, and she wrote an excellent piece in the Jerusalem Post this week about her experience of Manchester in a traditional / secular-ish home, and how she celebrated in her home in Christmas. And she describes, I recommend the article to you, she describes a complete acceptance and taking on of the Christmas traditions, albeit with the exception of the tree. And then, interestingly, she goes on to bemoan the lack of her own knowledge of her own Jewish festivals. In other words, she sort of knew more about other people's festivals than she did of her own. And as she puts in her article, she's now busy catching up on her own heritage, which is great. And I recommend that article to you. It's interesting reflection on what went on. So if we look at the sociological significance of the various approaches, we can learn a lot. If you have a look and ask the question, what were the consequences for the Jews who embraced Christmas traditions? Well, we've spoken already about what happened to the Western European elite Jews who embraced it hook, line and sinker. They ended up with everybody else in the gas chambers. But if you look in the 1950s, American Jewish sociologists started to make a few studies of this. In 1958, there was a study of second-generation immigrant Reform Jews on Chicago's South Side. A chap called Rabbi Milton Matz, M-A-T-Z. He was also, as well as being a rabbi, he was a clinical psychologist. And he did a study that showed that second-generation parents seemed to agree that a Jewish child might need a Christmas tree to, and I quote, it's a beautiful expression he uses, to hyphenate the contradiction between his Americanism and his Jewish ethnicism. So the Christmas tree hyphenates this apparent contradiction. But what was really interesting is that Matz's study also demonstrated that the next generation, the third generation, were increasingly more likely to recognize the contradiction in adopting religious symbols of another group. In other words, they got more confident in their own culture. They were not so ashamed of being Jews and not so desperate to be Americans that they would find other ways of expressing their acculturation into American society. And what was interesting further was, sure enough, in 1993, a study in Stanford by a professor, Arnold Eisen, validated Matz's findings and demonstrated that by 1993, when you are well into third and probably fourth, in some cases, generations, the majority of American Jews no longer had Christmas trees. 82% of Jewish households, in which all members of the household were Jewish, a Christmas tree had never been displayed. Interestingly, we see that as time has gone on, there's been a full circle. And there was another study in the 50s and 60s done by a sociologist called Marshall Sclair, also on second and third generation Jews. And that seemed to show that whereas Hanukkah had formerly been a minor Jewish holiday, it had gained much more importance when it became seen as the Jewish alternative for Christmas. And Sclair writes, I quote, "Instead of alienating the Jews from general culture, Hanukkah helps to situate him as a participant in that culture. Hanukkah, in short, becomes, for some, the Jewish Christmas." And it's ironic, really. So by elevating Hanukkah as an alternative to Christmas, American Jews had in effect invented their own holiday tradition, but sort of through a Christmas mirror. Very interesting. And finally, I come to the modern society. More recently, Jews have expressed their relationship with Christmas in a different way altogether, which I think sociologically sits somewhere between embracing Christmas and shunning it. So today, of course, we live in a world of acceptance of diversity, not only acceptance of diversity, but celebration of diversity. It's no longer necessary to do what my old Rebbe Balkin, some of you may have heard of him or suffered from him. Rebbe Balkin, Zichrono Livracha, used to call it, you don't need to ape the Goyim. So we don't need to ape the Goyim anymore. But equally so, we don't need to display the hostility or the fear that was once the case that we've described. So what is seen now, in some ways subtle and in some ways less subtle, is that Jews display their separateness, but at the same time, they validate Christian celebration. And what do I mean by that? For example, I remember as a junior doctor, so I'm talking in the late 80s and early 90s, I always volunteered to do the Christmas Day and Boxing Day shifts on call. And by doing so, I was in effect stating that I was different and I didn't celebrate Christmas, but I recognized my colleagues' desire to do so. And I was happy to facilitate that. And it was a win-win situation. And today you find Jews all over the place, as Jews, volunteering in care homes and food banks and hostels, and that allows their Christian friends to have a day off. And it also assists the less fortunate in society to enjoy their festival. And this is, in some ways, the great Jewish tradition of tikkun olam, of creating a better world. And of course, it's a great Kiddush Hashem as well. So you find that things like, visiting the housebound or preparing or delivering Christmas meals, buying Christmas presents for the poor, doing the Christmas shift for your colleagues at work, and increasingly volunteerism, this has become a sort of means of combining this Jewish value of tikkun olam, repairing and improving the world, with the Christmas message of bringing joy to the world. So we see, and we've seen that in our sort of whistle-stop tour of Jews and relationship with Christmas, that the Jews' relationship with Christmas really has been, through the ages, a barometer of society, which is what the title that I gave to this talk. And, who would have imagined that this once feared holiday, where Jews were scared to raise their head, that this would now, today, become an occasion for Jews to proudly affirm their identity, both as Jews and as fully integrated members of the outside world, without having to compromise their Jewishness, and without having to apologize for their Jewishness, and without having to take on somebody else's festival. We can help them enjoy their festival and celebrate our own relationship with the world. And I think that really is the message that we have. And I'll just finish by sharing my screen again with you with this little thing. I don't know if you can see that yet. Can you see that lovely picture there? No, you can't see it yet. Okay, let me see if I can show it to you now. Share screen. Why can't I share the screen? There we go. Share screen. And there it is. That's the one I want to show you. Can you see that lovely picture now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's it. There we are. Chanukah and a Christmas tree in one big jumper and you can get that for $45 from Forum Novelties. But I think that reflects Jewish society today as a barometer of our relationship with the world. So with that, I will finish. And if there are any questions or comments, I would be delighted to hear them. I'll let David, you're going to take this.
Oops. Okay, I let everybody can unmute themselves. Somebody has some feedback. Somebody has two computers next to each other. Hang on. Wait. Somebody has two computers next to each other. You need to move one of them away. Okay. All right, Mervyn, go ahead. Hang on. We've got to solve the feedback problem first. Hazel, it might be you. Is it you?
I'm in a different room from Jack.
All right, you got it.
I'm not next to him at all.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm here, she's there.
Yeah. Hang on a minute. All right.
Can I say something, David?
I'm going to mute everybody.
Can I?
Okay, I've muted everybody. Whoever wants to speak, I will unmute them. Mervyn, hang on a minute. Mervyn, unmute yourself. Mervyn, okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. First of all, can I thank you very, very much indeed for the superb lecture you've given this evening. I have learned so much that I was unaware of, and it has been a pure pleasure for me personally, and I'm sure for everyone, to listen to you tonight. So first of all, thank you. One question I have to ask you is that in recent years here in Israel, with the influx of so many Russians who have arrived here, many of them still have a Christmas tree. And I understand, rightly or wrongly, that it has a specific reason and basic understanding by the Russians who come here, and not for other countries, other Christians, or other Jews who are living here, but still have a Christmas tree because they're from Russia. Can you explain anything about this this situation?
Okay, thank you for your kind comments, first of all. Let me just say, if I may, before I try and answer your question a little bit, anybody who would like a transcript of what I have said tonight, it is available. And if you either send me or Avril Gatov a WhatsApp or an email, then you can be sent the transcript so you can read it all over again if you are so that way inclined. So to answer your question, I'm not an expert in Christmas trees by any means, but it's certainly the case that the Russian church have the Christmas tree as a much deeper religious symbol than many of the other Christian groups. For many of the Christian groups, and of course for many of the secular Christians, it's just a symbol of the time of year. But I was going to add into my talk a little bit about Christmas in Israel, but I realized that if I did that, it would take me well over the time. Maybe next year, if I'm invited again on Christmas Malava Malka, maybe I'll talk about that next year. But just very briefly, you mentioned that with the influx of many Russians, there have been a lot more Christmas trees. I remember being here not that many years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, and you never saw a Christmas symbol at all. You never saw a Christmas tree. I remember in Netanya, and this is not that long ago, maybe 13 years ago at the most. I remember that there was one shop down Herzl Street, about halfway down on the left-hand side, which had a picture or a model of a Santa Claus in it. And that was the only one you could, I mean, I often came here, before I made Aliyah, I often came to Netanya for the Christmas holidays with the kids, and you did not know it was Christmas. And there was just this one shop that had it, and you didn't see anything. Now, of course, there are lots of advertising, even the malls have got Christmas decorations up, and on TV, and those of you who listen to Israel TV, you'll see adverts for Christmas, and it has definitely come in much more than it used to. Now, we are a Jewish state, but we have a significant, not only do we have a significant Christian population, we have a very deep Christian history in our land. And whilst it is right that in our Jewish majority land, the Jewish symbols of Hanukkah and what have you should take precedence, I, for one, believe in the diversity that there should be places that should have this if that's what they want. My son lives, one of my sons lives in the north in a place called Ein Yaakov, which is a moshav in the north. And when he goes to work, he passes a lot of the Arab Christian villages, and they are full of it. He says it's like, you know, it's like being back in the UK, and their particular areas are very, very awash, as it were, with Christian symbols. We are a Jewish country and we have Jewish symbols, but nevertheless, we must accommodate in the same way as we want to be accommodated in Chutz La'aretz. We must accommodate here in Israel. That's my view.
Okay, any other points?
Can I say something, David?
Go ahead, Rabbi.
About this point regarding Christmas in Israel. I had this very conversation with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. One of the features, something I was very fortunate of, was that when I was a young rabbi in the United Synagogue, he used to invite the young rabbanim to his home for lunch and learn regularly. And before every session, he would give us the option of raising questions or issues or topics. I don't remember if I raised this very question, but it was in the news. I believe I did. It was in the news that it was in the Israeli news that the University of Haifa placed a Christmas tree in the lobby. Openly placed a Christmas tree in the lobby of the university to show affiliation with its Christian students, and many students were up in arms. Not just people in the country, but many students were up in arms. And then when I was a Jew in a Christian country, living in England, I felt uncomfortable. I felt uncomfortable with the lack of tolerance. And I remembered that when I was a Jew living in a Jewish country, I wouldn't have liked Christmas trees in Jewish institutions either. So I spoke to Rabbi Sachs. I said, what does the Rav feel? And he asked me, he said, well, what do you think?
Tell him to call back.
David, can you mute everyone?
I just muted.
Okay, sorry. So he asked me, well, what do you think? And I told him exactly what Dr. Lieberman is saying. I said, if we want Hanukkah to be not only tolerated, but celebrated in the United Kingdom, which is a Christian country, and we want to go every year to the square in London where there's a huge concert and the mayor of London comes. If we want space as Jews in a Christian country, then we ought to give some space to Christians in our Jewish country. And it's exactly what Dr. Lieberman said, and I can say that Rabbi Sachs 100% accepted that, 100%.
That whole issue came up this week with the Knesset, I believe. That some the Arab groups wanted to put a Christmas tree in a public place in the Knesset. The Knesset said no, but if you want to put it in your own offices, by all means, that's fine. But the Knesset was not willing to tolerate having a Christmas tree in an openly public location in the Knesset, which after all is a central feature of the Jewish Israeli government.
So I'll say another thing, which based on your comment, which Dr. Lieberman mentioned briefly. A few years ago, there was a group of students at the midrasha where I teach that on Christmas night wanted to have a party. Christmas Eve, they wanted to have a party. Obviously, it wasn't going to be a Christmas party, and it wasn't going to be, you know, anything that had to do with Christianity. But these are girls who grew up in the United States, and the 25th of December, people were home and they'd have a meal, and siba le mesiba, really nothing Christian about it, but they wanted to, you know, to have a party. And the MTC administration and management were horrified, and I think rightfully so. You know, you're an Orthodox girl at a Jewish seminary. Your parents are paying a lot of money for you to learn Torah, and here you take the night off to have a party in your house, you know, in your dormitory, celebrate, you know, on Christmas Eve. And their response was like, "Do you know what world you live in?" And I interfered and I told them, "Listen, I want you to remember that for many, many years, many Jews were petrified on the 25th of December night. They would have to fortify themselves at home behind locked doors to hope that the drunk people outside wouldn't become violent on Christmas night towards the Jews. And the hope, you know, sometimes happened, sometimes they were subject to violence. And these are your ancestors. So when you have an innocent party in your house, you need to understand the historical context, why some people are horrified. And I am sensitive to I don't think when the average Jew in Israel, who hasn't lived in a Christian country and doesn't appreciate the tolerance which these countries now show Hanukkah today, and if you speak to most of the Jewish public in Israel, they don't want Christian symbols. I don't think it's racism. I don't think it's a lack of tolerance. I think it's, number one, a lack of an awareness because they didn't live in Christian countries. And number two, it's that Jewish trauma which the day has brought to them. And that's obviously why the Knesset said no.
Ask the question,
I'd like,
please.
1 second, Philip, please. I want to just mention something, come back on that. My own view on this is that the Knesset were wrong. I think the Knesset should have allowed it. I'm not suggesting that they have, you know, a 20-foot tree in pride of place there, but the White House has a menorah on Hanukkah,
Yes.
And the Houses of Parliament has a menorah on Hanukkah. It's not a 20-foot, you know, huge thing, but it's there. It's symbolic to tell us that we tolerate. I personally think the Knesset were wrong. That's my view, and probably, as Rabbi Baruch says, it's probably because I'm very sensitive to the fact that I grew up in a very tolerant British society. I think that my generation that grew up in the 60s and 70s had the best time of all in terms of, I rarely came across anti-Semitism personally. And I grew up in a tolerant society, and it gives me a warm feeling to know that my parliament in the UK and that the American White House recognizes the value of Hanukkah and recognizes that Jews have a festival. And I think it is wrong of the Knesset to forbid having a Christmas symbol in the Knesset. That's my view. Fortunately for me, I'm not a member of the Knesset, and therefore it makes absolutely no difference what I think. But there you go, that is my view. And of course, as Rabbi Baruch said, the history of the day, which we spoke about in some detail earlier on, it lasts long, it leaves scars. And I think that the customs of Nittelnacht that I went to in some detail are basically those scars being brought to the fore in a modern way. I think that's how it goes.
Philip Lehrer, go ahead.
Okay, it's all very nice that there's Christmas trees all over the place and everything, but I don't know if you guys see Facebook. In the last couple of months on Facebook, you're getting more and more blatant missionary activity by American evangelicals who supposedly are our allies and who supposedly agreed not to missionize in Israel, but they are doing it. And I think that the result, and my question to you is, if the result of being very tolerant and very good about it, because we are also tolerated all over the world in other places as token Jews, by the way. Is it a good idea to go on with this, to let it go on without any limitation?
Nobody's suggesting that the Christmas tree takes over as the symbol of the Jewish state. But
no, I didn't say that, Johnny. I didn't say that.
I know you did, but that's the implication. I personally, I don't see a connection between being tolerant of other religions' symbols whilst recognizing that they are minorities in this country.
Missionary activity, Johnny. Missionary activity.
The missionary activity is not connected, in my view, to having Christmas tree symbols. And if you,
there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are open to this, Johnny. There are hundreds of thousands of secular, ignorant Israelis who are very open to this, and it's a big danger. And my question is, should we let it go on just freely? We can let it go on, but just freely without any limitation.
My answer, Philip.
There's limitation in England and in Belgium and in America.
Are you interested in Philip? Are you interested in my answer, or are you just interested in ranting? If you're interested in my answer, I will give it you, and that is that
I'm interested in your answer, but I'm going to go on ranting.
Well, I have the ability to mute you, so there you go. Right there, you're muted. So now I can give Philip's answer to Philip. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Philip and I have a wonderful relationship. We love each other, so we're allowed to banter to one another. So Philip, the answer is that, of course, missionary activity needs to be monitored, and there are organizations that do that. But I don't see that there is a connection between allowing a Christmas tree in the Knesset and us being tolerant of our of other religions wanting to do their own thing. Sure, I'm as anti-missionary as anybody else, but we need to be vigilant about the missionaries, but the two things are not connected. We have to remain tolerant and remain vigilant. I think that's how it goes.
Okay, before I invite Hazel, I just want to say a quick word. What you just did, Johnny, reminds me, soon after COVID started, I heard an interview on the radio. They interviewed a school teacher who is now teaching their kids by Zoom. And they asked the school teacher, what are you going to miss when you go back into the classroom? And she said, the ability to mute everybody.
Okay.
All right, Hazel, go ahead.
Can I say?
Okay, hang on one thing. Let me go to Hazel first, and then I'll come to Israel. Hang on, Hazel, go ahead.
Thank you very much. First of all, Rabbi Dr. Lieberman, Johnny, it was I will say, as Mervyn said, it was a brilliantly discussed subject this evening, and something which we rarely talk about. And it has been a subject which I feel we need to educate our Jewish children, especially those who go to Jewish schools. And then later, as in Leeds, at the age of 11, we didn't have upper schools like in Manchester. They had to go into non-Jewish schools. And these Jewish children were not equipped one iota in how to not necessarily defend themselves as Jews, but to know anything about the period of Jesus. It was something which was taboo, and I never ever agreed with that. I wanted my children to be able to answer politely and correctly our Jewish point of view. That's number one. Number two, Johnny, I loved going to Manchester, especially for mince pies. You left that out from the Christmas pudding. And they were in a bakery, a very famous bakery in Manchester. And we always went across the Pennines to get those. Number three, I'd like to read as a source the whole idea of the Christmas tree. The custom of having a Christmas tree decorated with candles and hung with presents came to England with the craze for German things, which followed Queen Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert. And that's how we got Christmas trees in England. And it further says, Santa Claus, whose name has not even yet been anglicized, with his reindeer has been unknown until then. So I just thought you might to hear a little bit of something like that. Thank you a million times. Also, I was also very honored and proud to be a volunteer in the hospitals in Leeds to take over and let the nurses go home to celebrate their Christmas festivals. And we used to explain to the patients that we're Jewish, we will look after you, we'll take care for you, and let your Christian friends go home. And that to me is how, if we're living in the diaspora, we have to get on with other people as best we can, explain our point of view, listen to their point of view, and let us meet and go each way, whichever way we have to go, with peace and understanding. And I want to thank you from my heart. It has been the most brilliant talk that I have ever heard on putting forward Christmas to the Jewish people. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Hazel.
Hazel.
Can I just say a couple of things on that? First of all, kol hakavod to you for doing that in the hospital in Leeds. It doesn't surprise me to hear that at all. I know that you have been that kind of volunteer forever, and I'm not surprised, but kol hakavod to you. The first point that you made is a very important point. I also went to a Jewish junior school, which, as I said to you, Christmas was not only not discussed, we weren't even allowed to say the word. And then I went to a non-Jewish secondary school, and I found it very, very difficult. I did not know how to deal with it. My parents, as it so happens, were very open and did explain things to me, but it wasn't the same. I had no education. And not only that, when I got to the non-Jewish secondary school, which was a very good school, they had religious studies lessons. And of course, we didn't go to those. The Jewish boys were excused from that. So our ignorance about anything to do with Christianity continued. And it continued for me into my adulthood. I didn't know anything about the real origins of anything until I decided to find out for myself, because I happened to be interested. But I can tell you that the majority of my contemporaries, the majority of people that were brought up in an average, if you like, Jewish home in Manchester of my age will know absolutely nothing about Christianity, about the New Testament, about what they believe in, because not only were we not told about it, we were actually told it was forbidden. You couldn't go anywhere near it. And I agree with you, Hazel. We need to be able to be strong enough to be able to learn about other cultures and not to be frightened of it. And if it was up to me, I would have education about comparative religion in Jewish schools. I don't know. I'm far too old to know what goes on in Jewish schools today in the diaspora. I don't even live in the diaspora anymore. But I would like to hear that there were lessons on comparative religion, not only Christianity, but Islam as well, because we need to do it. My son, as many of you will know, is a rabbi in Australia. Is extremely active in interfaith and has debated the New Testament and the Quran with his other clergy. And you can't do that unless you know about it. And I think it's a very important point that you make about the lack of education, not just the lack of education, but the anti-education of Christianity and other religions. So I think that point that you made is very, very important.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to Israel and then to Harold, who will give us an American perspective. Israel, first of all.
Hi. Actually, I want to, but I hear Johnny quite often because I know he's a great man and a great lecturer. But I want to return back to a question what Mr. Leviton asked about Russian Jews who brought the Christmas tree. Actually, in Russia, Christmas tree doesn't represent no Christmas, because Russian Christmas, actually, it's in January. It's not in December 25. In Russian tree represents exclusively New Year celebration. And that is because all religions, including Christianity and Judaism, Islam, everything was forbidden in Russia. And that's what is remnant just for beauty of it, because, you know, like it's so sparkly and so nice and represent only New Year. It's nothing to do with Christmas. Nothing to do with any Christian celebration. And I, you know, like on a second about tolerance, I agree with that. But one interesting rabbi, he said so, you know, like I feel for many people, for Arabs, for Christians, but Arabs have 50 states. Christians have many more, and there's only one state, exclusive state. To learn about this religion is great, but Jewish state has to be Jewish state, because we were in minority, and right now I don't know if it's tolerance or, you know, maybe not anti-Semitism on a government part, but it's still brewing in United States. It's brewed all over the world. You know, like, it doesn't matter if it's menorah stays in Washington and White House. It doesn't mean that we are not hated on the streets. It doesn't make any difference. That's why I think Christmas, yeah, if you celebrate Christmas, and no problem, celebrate at your home what you celebrate. Like we Jews were celebrating it for thousands of years, everything in our home. And Christmas tree in the Knesset, I disagree with it.
Okay. Thanks for the insight, Stanley, on the Russian side. That's obviously a view from the inside, guys. There from Stanley.
Yeah, I spent 36 years in Russia.
Johnny, can I add on something, please?
Okay, hang on. Let's go. I promise Harold now. Harold, go ahead.
The United States is a much less hierarchical and much less structured country than the United Kingdom or the Commonwealth countries. It's very amorphous, very porous, and the anti-Semitism that was felt was never state-sponsored or state-condoned. It was always something that was felt locally, if at all. And the connections between the faiths were much more apparent in America than they might have been elsewhere, because there was nothing to keep them apart. And it is said that in America, the person that defanged Christianity was Irving Berlin, who in a movie called Holiday Inn, what he did was convert Easter into a fashion parade in your Easter bonnet, and he converted Christmas into a white Christmas, and he made
and that's why
and he had a wonderful song.
Famous.
And so that the experience in America was a very personal one, if it came about at all. And I went to nothing but we call them in America public schools, but not the public school of England. I went to very ordinary schools, a good high school, I will say, but we did not experience anything coming from the state or any official body. Anything that you experienced was experienced on a personal level, which, given the nature of street brawls, could be taken care of anyway, and they were. And so the experience might be similar, but certainly not analogous.
Yeah, the point really is, isn't it, Harold, that there is a defined separation of religion and state in the United States. It's part of the Constitution, isn't it, that religion and state are separate? Whereas, of course, in the UK, it is a Christian country. The Queen is the head of the Church of England. So you, right from the start, the reasons for the things that you've said are fundamental, really, and I'm sure that's correct. you see that state-sponsored Christianity in the UK, which you don't see in the United States.
Okay, let me.
Johnny,
David,
you recommend.
Hang on just a minute. I want to give chance. Wait a minute. Somebody hasn't spoken yet. Just a minute.
David, Jill Boxer has been trying to speak for a long time. She's had her hand up for a long time. I
don't see Jill Boxer. Jill, are you here?
Yes.
Jill, go ahead. All right. And then Jack Brock afterwards. Jill, go ahead.
Very much for an interesting talk. I used to work for a Chabad dentist, and in our waiting room we had a television. Every Christmas Eve he would take the television home for his children to watch. It was the only day of the year they were allowed to watch television. But my question is, going back to the first period you spoke about when they were being persecuted.
Did you get your question in?
What I'm just going to asking it, Hazel. What happened to when Hanukkah and Christmas coincided? You were supposed to leave the Hanukkah lights in the window.
Yeah, well, they didn't. Is actually the answer. In those kind of places, it's interesting because if you look in the commentators, many of the poskim of that time talk about Pirsuma Nisa, the publicizing of the miracle of Hanukkah. And they actually say quite clearly in places where it is dangerous to do so, the Chanukiah, the menorah, should be placed inside and not in a place of prominence like that. And certainly in those places where they were scared of pogroms and the like at Christmas time, when Hanukkah came around, there would be no publicizing of the miracle because that was just like putting your hand up and asking for trouble. So you're absolutely right. In those days, there were dark days and people were scared for their lives. It's like what Rabbi Baruch said before, it was these are the scars run very deep from this. And in those days, we did not publicize the menorah. It was not put in the window at all. If it was kept it well away from the window for exactly that reason, as you've said.
Okay, Jack Brock, did you want to say something?
Yes, I do. Oops, just 1 second. I'll put this back. About 25 years ago, I took Hazel and Estelle back to Vienna. My first visit after about 60 years, and it was just we're there walking through the streets, and it happened at the time when the Viennese Christmas market was open, and we looked around. It's just after Hanukkah, and we were walking on the market. I look at the store and show you what we found there. Can you see it? Oops. A dreidel.
A dreidel. Okay.
And he said to me, "What's this thing?" This is a very popular Christmas game. Everybody plays that game on Christmas. I'm just reverting back to this. This was just after Hanukkah. So I've got the sample here to show you. Nim, twee, nim, drie, nim, eins.
Wonderful, wonderful. I did actually read about this. I can't remember. I was researching some Hanukkah thing that I was doing. I can't remember what it was, and I came across exactly that idea that this was a Western European and an old Western European custom. I don't know whether we took it from them or they took it from us. Actually, depends on. I suppose it depends on where you find your sources. But yeah, thank you for showing that. That's tremendous. That's tremendous. Can I just say, David, that Vivian has been waiting patiently, and so has Nachum. They've got their hand up.
Okay, I see their yellow hands. Okay, Vivian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. Superb as always, Johnny. Thank you so very much. Just a few thoughts on what we'll call tolerance. I think what's happened is we've had in Christianity, in the, as you say, the Christian country of Britain, there's actually less and less religion in Christmas. For most people, in my experience, it had nothing to do with Jesus, nothing. It was a public holiday. It was a time of gifts. It was a time off. It was a time to spend with family, but very, very little time to do, very little to do with Jesus at all. And for us, the symbol of Hanukkah, the Chanukiah, was promoted so vigorously by Chabad. They have done the most amazing work in this sense, in making the Chanukiah a welcome symbol. But what occurs to me is that it used to be for me that a symbol was like a gateway to more information. Now a symbol is a symbol unto itself. That's the end of it. For many non-Jews, and unfortunately for Jews, a Chanukiah is just something, it's a festival of light, and every religion has a festival of light in the winter. For the non-Jews, it's Christmas with lights on the trees and everything else. For us, it's Hanukkah. And most religions have a festival in the winter of light to light one's soul. And many Jews, I say, especially non-Jews, have very little understanding of what the Chanukiah means. The story of Hanukkah, the symbol, stops there. And that strikes me as being a shame. But I just want to share a thought. You talked about anti-Semitism on Christmas. For myself, I have a very personal story going back about 20 years when I was working for an organization of highly intelligent people. And my then chairman, when I said I was going to be away here in Israel, actually for my late mother-in-law's, I think, 90th birthday, which fell at the end of December, said, quote, "Why are you going to be away then when you killed him?" I mean, I took this to the furthest point I could. I got solicitors' advice, etc., 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 because that accusation has killed millions of Jews through the century. All the pogroms you talked about at Christmas time all relate to the fact that allegedly we killed Jesus, which of course we didn't. And sadly, that still continues today.
You shocked me, Vivian, actually, to hear that that was only 20 years ago, because I thought that we'd done with that, really. What was interesting is that in 1963, Pope Paul VI, who was not the greatest friend of ours, nevertheless did write in one of the, whatever they call them, one of his droshes, that the official line is no longer that the Jews killed Jesus, and there was a lot of fuss about that. It was in 1963, so it's a long time ago, nearly 60 years ago. And there was a big fuss about that in both the Christian world. Some, weren't very happy about it. But there was a spate of Jewish, what can you call them? I suppose hotheads, really, who wrote slogans all over the place here in Israel, which basically said, "We did so kill the bastard," and that sort of fired up worse anti-Semitism, of course. But I'm surprised to hear that somebody would express that view only 20 years ago. My father told me about it when he was a kid. Well, my father, if he had been alive today, would be well in his 90s. So we were talking 80 odd years ago when he had to suffer all that. But I thought personally, I'm shocked to hear that in the UK in the 2000s, which is 20 years ago, there are people that think that Jews killed Jesus. But I guess there's always going to be the odd nutter around, but we have to be vigilant, I guess. But I think we can safely say that the vast majority of the world doesn't believe that anymore and doesn't care anyway. And I think that was the point that you were making early on, is that Christmas, as I said earlier on, has been so commercialized that it doesn't really mean anything in terms of Christianity at all. But thank you for sharing that. It's quite shocking.
And especially as
Rabbi Lieberman.
Vivian said it was a high-level group. It wasn't just people off the street. So.
Rabbi Lieberman,
it was one individual who thought he was being amusing. There was nothing funny about it. That's the problem.
Rabbi, then Nachum Jacobs will be next. Rabbi Budorowski, go ahead.
I don't know. I don't know what the vast majority of the world thinks, and I would love to know if Rabbi Lieberman has statistics about what the vast majority of the Christian world thinks. The vast majority of the Christian world don't live in London and Manchester. There are millions of Christians in Eastern Europe, in South America, all over the world, and I'm not certain that that's not what they think. I don't know, but I think we need to be careful. I don't know. I mean, Rabbi Lieberman, do you have
I don't have statistics because I don't know if anybody's asked the question, do you believe the Jews killed Jesus? But
I was asked that question by Christians, not just Vivian.
Well, what we do see
in Denver, Colorado. Yeah.
I think what we do see is that the Christian
Dr. Lieberman, you were never told in your life, you were never told by a non-Jew that you are the ultimate murderers.
Me personally, no.
Yeah, but I was told that. But in the United States of America.
Well, I think the thing that we need to just remember is that the church itself has distanced itself from that position.
Yes.
And I think that is a very important point. Now, what Christians in Eastern Europe and South America think about that question, I really can't tell you. But what I can tell you is that there has been tremendous progress made by the fact that the church has repeatedly, I sound like an apologist for the church here, but I'm not.
No, you're right. You're right about that. You're right
they
about
have repeatedly over the last 60 years distanced themselves from that position, and I think that we must recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Nachum Jacobs and then Ruth Rogoff.
I wanted to also offer my opinion as a former American. The issue of church and state was only recently in the history of America have some input into whether or not Jews were going to be subjected to Christianity as an entity in their life. I mean, the high school, the elementary schools, the middle schools, all had Christmas programs, and it was all based on Christian behaviors. The songs, the glee clubs, the choruses, everything was thrown in the Jews' face. And it wasn't until the Supreme Court made a decision that you can't do that to minority people who don't believe in this, that this was changed. So it's a separation of church and state, but it's only recently. And in my lifetime, I've been subjected to Christianity in its worst forms. I've walked on the streets and been called, Christ killer. They see me on Shabbat walking in a suit. They know who I am. I think that the state of Israel is the one entity in the whole world that can stand up for Jewish values, and to put a Christmas tree in my Knesset, I'll wait until they put a menorah in the Vatican. And don't worry, it won't happen. And it should not happen in this country. The left-thinking people in this country will help destroy it the same as they've done in America. And I am absolutely against anything to do with Israel becoming a complacent society about any religion except our own. We have a need to make sure that the Jews in this country become less and less secular and more Jewish. One other thing, I lived in that society in America, and I resented the fact that Chabad was putting these menorahs all over everywhere. I don't like it. I think it shouldn't be done. The menorah belongs in my Jewish community, my Jewish house, my Jewish friends. It has nothing to do with being put on anybody else's property but my own. And I'm sorry that they keep doing it. And I'll end with this. Johnny has a picture that he showed us of a man and a woman in some kind of an outfit, some kind of a blanket of some kind. And that spells out exactly what's wrong in the Jewish community in America. The assimilation rate is 70%. And that picture is a good example of what it is. Throwing Christianity, its concepts, its ideals, and worst of all, its history against the Jewish people. And that picture summed it all up. And I saw it, and it broke my heart to see that. And I'm sorry it didn't break the heart of everybody else, because what I think is that many of the people that are watching this program lived in a sheltered society. And I've never been in Manchester. I don't know what England's all about, except when I was there one time, they told me not to wear my kippah on the street. I couldn't find Esha Torah because they refused to put their address in the phone book because of terrorism. The one shul I went to in London had drapes on the outside fitted so that the vandalism of bullets in the window would be suppressed. I couldn't even come in except to sit with somebody with a top hat. Listen, you have no idea what the sheltered life you have lived compared to what I lived in a society that didn't let me go to certain schools, society that didn't let me have certain places to live. You have no idea what it's like to live under that oppression. So I want you to wake up and get away from this idea that there has to be diversity in Israel. I came here because I don't want diversity. I want the Jewish people to have this country 100%. And anybody that thinks that they should change this system for the sake of Christians or Muslims or any other Hindus, I don't care what they are, they don't belong in this country. We should be mensch to them. We should make sure we don't bother them. But get off of our case. This is our place to live. The only place I can live and feel comfortable. And I think everybody should start rethinking diversity. Let them be diverse. Let me live in this country without any diversity. I'll be a mensch, I'll be honest, I'll be decent to these people, but get off of this, please.
All right. Johnny, you want to respond before I call on Ruth?
Well,
David Lucia. You know what, David Lou, you shut yourself up. Don't you tell people that somebody should shut me up. You shut yourself up and go back home.
Okay. There's much in I mean, Nachum is Nachum's views are well known. He's passionate about Israel, and there's a lot of what he says resonates with me. But I can't agree that we shouldn't be tolerant. I can't agree that we should exclusivize Israel, because we're asking then for the world to exclusivize us out of the rest of the world. And until such time as we all Jews live in Israel, then we need to be dealt with appropriately and allowed to do what we do in Chutz La'aretz, and therefore as a quid pro quo alone, and forget human decency, but a quid pro quo alone, we need to show tolerance to other religions in our country. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we allow Christians or Muslims or Hindus or anybody else to take over the national flavor of Israel in any way, more than I'm suggesting that the Jews take over the national flavor of the United States or the UK. However, I can't agree with Nachum's approach to that degree.
Yeah, what I would suggest, Johnny, is when we all manage to meet again in person, hopefully in the not too distant future, maybe Tzchedet could organize a live debate on this topic. I think you'd have some very interesting opinions, because this is too complicated to discuss in a forum like this. But in an organized debate, I think you can have some really good discussion on these issues.
I think you're right. I mean, we've been going almost 2 hours now, and we've still got 40 people on the thing.
People are loving it.
It shows you that the topic is holding interest. So yeah,
absolutely, it's resonating, and as long as you and I and people want to stay, we can keep going. No one's got any other plans tonight. Okay, Ruth Rogoff, and then I see Ella Rubin has put a hand up. But Ruth Rogoff, go ahead. Unmute yourself, Ruth.
I'm going to come in with something completely different, completely off the topic that we've just been discussing for so long. And I'll tell you, before I tell you this is a piece of information that I have beaten myself up about it for many, many years. I'm going to tell you now that my parents, where they lived in Germany before I was born, in a town called Zwickau, and my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, Zichrono Livracha, was the rabbi of a small, well, relatively small community of Zwickau. And my parents were married in Zwickau in the rabbinic home on December the 25th, Christmas Day, on a Friday. Now, you are all going to ask me now, why didn't you ask your parents, why were they married on Christmas Day? And what was it all about? It was the Jewish wedding, because in those days, certainly in Germany then, I think even now, you had to have a civil wedding separately in a particular office. This was the chuppah on a Friday, Christmas Day, in a Hasidic home. Now, I don't know why. I've got my mother's wedding ring on now, and you can see, I don't know if you probably can't see it, but if anyone's got any information as to why weddings took place on Christmas Day in Germany at all, I'd be very pleased to know. And you can all ask me, why didn't you ask them? Why didn't you make, I myself know this. Why didn't I ask them, why were they married on that day? And how did it come about? But when I did think of it, it was too late.
Wedding on a Friday in itself is unusual, isn't it?
No, Friday, Hasidim get married on a Friday.
Okay.
Hasidim traditionally get married on a Friday.
Okay. Any response? Otherwise, we'll go to Ella. You respond? I just had a thought, Ruth. It's possible. You get married when things are convenient for the family. Nearly all of my parents' wedding anniversaries and all their families' things were all done in February. And that is because my parents and grandparents had a shop selling ladies' clothing. And they were very busy over Christmas and then the January sales. And then in February, all went dead quiet and they never sold a thing. So that's when they had all their simchas. My parents got married on the day the king died on February the 6th, 1952. And lots of things happened in my family in February because of nothing else happening in the business. And it just occurred to me that maybe Christmas Day was a quiet day for Hasidic rabbis in your parents' community, and maybe that was a time when they, you know, because the rest of we're all hunkering down and keeping our heads down, that was the day that they would get married. Just a thought.
This was in 1931. They got married 25th of December 1931. Maybe because of I don't know, Nazi rules. I mean, Hitler was in power even then. He didn't come into power till 1933, but his influence was great, and there were still rules and all kinds of different problems that Jews had. So maybe that was to do with it. If anyone can throw any light on it, I'd be very pleased.
All right, Ella Rubin, did you want to say something? Unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Johnny, for bringing it up. I actually didn't understand why we should talk about Christmas, and I joined this meeting just to find out what's interesting about that. And I found it very interesting. And thank you for bringing it up. I think it's very important to bring it to our mind and just to think about that once again, what's going on in the world and even around us, just like Hudi lives in an area where Arabs, Christian Arabs actually live, and he sees that and he experienced that. So I also would like to share with as much, yeah, there's a lot of people left here. Maybe I represent the people that are younger. I'm 36 right now, and I'm coming from originally from Moldova, Chisinau. Maybe someone knows where is it, between Ukraine and Romania. So I grew up and I was studying in a school, Jewish school, and we was basically off for Jewish holidays and not Jewish holidays too, in a Jewish school. So of course, all of us kids know what's New Year is and what's Christmas Eve is, and it was quite confusing for us why we're off on that day actually. So we did see the outside situation of lights and Christmas trees everywhere. It was quite confusing for children like us that basically go to a school where we are Jewish, but we're still in a way in an area, in an environment of not Jewish, you know, the traditions and the holidays. So when you come to Israel and you don't see that, you know, the difference of it is it's a big dissonance. Like it's like, wow, there is no trees, there is no signs of you know, Happy New Year and that kind of things. It's kind of, you can understand that it was kind of your tradition, but it wasn't actually, but kind of was, because it was there all the time, and you don't ask yourself what Christmas and what New Year means to you until you come here and don't see that here. So I really think that we do need to be open to other nations, to other religions, and you know, I don't disagree to put the Christmas tree in a Knesset park or whatever you call it. But I really think that we need to be very aware of our future generation, like me, as if I would think that me coming to a country that we were wishing to come and see here a Christmas tree in a Knesset, it would be kind of, you know, it would be disappointing for me. So I just think we should be aware of what we're doing. Maybe us who are grown up and we do care to know what Christmas and New Year are. We need to think about our next generation and what they're gonna think and know the boundary, how much we're gonna go and you know, be liberal with other people. So it's very important to be aware of it. And I think the lecture was fascinating. Thank you. And hello from
Thank you, Ella.
Jerusalem.
It's great to see you, Ella, even if it's only on a screen. You should come and visit us soon and bring that lovely Chani with you. Ella, for those of you who don't know, was and is still a bat bayit in our home, and we love her very much. It's very interesting to hear Ella's perspective because, of course, Ella came from an area which most of us are not familiar with. We heard from Stanley earlier on, who also, as he said, spent 30 years in Russia. But that part of the world, it's interesting that Ella says that she was confused when she was in school by this dual holiday. I never felt that at all. And that's probably because, you know, my education at home was such that you knew jolly well, this was your Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot, that was your Yom Tov. Christmas was their Yom Tov. Easter was their Yom Tov. Yeah, you live in a Christian society, you get the time off school, you don't go to school and what have you. But it was very clear, the boundaries when I was growing up was very, very clear. It's interesting that Ella, coming from Eastern Europe, found that boundaries a little bit more fluid, if you like. That's a very interesting observation. And again, I think that what Ella is saying is she's a little uncomfortable with the idea of having other people's symbols in our Knesset. But, you know, as I said before, the White House has a menorah, the Houses of Parliament have a menorah. It's not like the Vatican, you know, we're not asking for a Christmas tree to be put in the great synagogue in Jerusalem. The Knesset is not the great synagogue. It's not a comparison with the Vatican. So I think it's important that we get perspective on it. Nobody's suggesting that, you know, it takes over or even that it has equality with the menorah or the state symbol of Israel, which is the menorah. We're not suggesting it has equality. What we're suggesting what I'm suggesting is that it's acceptable to have a symbol of another religion within the Knesset, to recognize that we are not, as the world wants to paint us as, an apartheid state. I don't think it does any good for us to be painted as an apartheid state. And I think that would be playing into their hands to refuse to have a symbol of Christianity in the Knesset. That's my own view. And I accept that there are other people like Nachum who have strong views opposite to that. And that's what makes the world go round. Lovely to see you, Ella.
We brought perspectives from different countries. Izzy Silas, I suspect, is going to give us a different perspective now. Izzy, go ahead. Unmute.
Can I talk now?
Hang on. Izzy Silas, first of all.
I just wanted to give you a perspective of what happened when I was young. I grew up in India. And my whole education till I went to university was in a Jesuit school. It was the school which gave the best education, and my parents felt that that was where we would go. There was no problem about having a problem with other religions because we were very, very safe at home. My father was a Chazan. We had Jewish education at home. There was never any problem about mixing with any other congregations. In fact, the priests used to come to our home for tea and have discussions with my father. And we had a very good relationship. We had holidays. In fact, my father said he was paying for education when I was mostly at home because we had the Indian holidays, the Christian holidays, the Jewish holidays. And he says, you know, I don't know why I'm paying for education. But anyway, that was it was a very easy, there was no anti-Semitism whatsoever. We never felt any difference with any other religion. And I spent, we learned about the Christian religion as well. We had what was called religious education, one class, when the others went to their catechism classes. All the non-Catholics would have a religious education. So we learned about their religion and we felt comfortable with them. I must say it helped me throughout my life to be able to mix with all sorts of religions and with other people and to make it easy to converse with them. We've never had any problems of diversity. It was just one congregation. We were all well together.
Because traditionally, there's always been a lot of tolerance, or very little anti-Semitism in the Far East, India, and then further to China and Japan and so on. Has never been really characterized by anti-Semitism. Those societies have always been very tolerant.
So we never had the problems which European countries had or American countries had.
Okay.
Can I just share my screen with you all a sec? My son has just sent me this picture because he's been listening. Can you see that picture on the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Trafalgar Square. And I'm not sure if it's the perspective, but it might be. But the menorah's much bigger than the Christmas tree. It's almost as big as Nelson's column.
It's in the Goyish country.
On that picture. So there we are. There's our menorah proudly standing in Trafalgar Square. So I just thought I'd share you that my son just sent me. Thank you very much.
But it's not in Israel.
Anybody who hasn't yet spoken before we go around second round? Anybody who wants to say something the first time?
Yes.
Hang on. We've got Philip Mehra, we've got Nachum Jacobs, and Mervyn Leviton.
No,
already.
It's not me. It's my wife.
Okay, Nachum Jacobs, Mrs. Nachum Jacobs. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I understand that I have a different background than the rest of the group because I had the merit of being born in Israel to parents who ran away from Vienna because after Kristallnacht. And I feel very strongly, since all my education in Israel was never, ever in the beginning involved with symbols of other religions. We were doing the holidays, we were singing the songs of the holidays, and it was not a question at all. The first time I saw a Christmas tree in a window was when the Russians started coming to Israel, with integrated marriages. I went to Haifa once with my husband, and suddenly I see in the middle of the roundabout a big a Christmas tree decorated. It gave me in my heart a very strange feeling. Am I in my country or am I in a different country? I lived in America for 20-something years, but when I'm here in my house, why should I have it in public places? Why should I have it? It's mine. My soldiers, our soldiers, the Jews, are giving their life to protect this. Not the Christians, not the Muslims. The Muslims are fighting with us. But I want to have the feeling that this is my little house. It's small. Wherever I drive, go somewhere, I see an Arab village here, an Arab village there. I want to see also Jewish. But God, thank God we have it. I was brought up in Jewish schools, in Hebrew schools, not in Jewish schools, from the first grade in Tel Aviv. I went high school in Tel Aviv. All my education at the university was in the Hebrew university. But it was mine. Why do I have to give in my little tiny place also space to the Christian world, which is so big? And my parents suffered so much, had to run away. My father was almost taken away to concentration camp, had to wash the floor in Vienna in the middle of the street to be humiliated. I tried to play piano, Heilige Nacht. I didn't know that this is Heilige Nacht, and my mother was screaming, "Stop, don't dare playing it." And she was right. I didn't understand her at the time because this is not mine. Why should I let them come in now and take even the little I have? It's the little I have. I have very, very little. I see in the Knesset, the Yoshev Rosh of the Knesset sits and it's a Muslim and he leads the Knesset. It bothers me somewhere. But why should I give the little bit that I have to others? In America, when I understood the Chabad lights the candles here, the Christmas tree there, because we are guests there. But here I'm not a guest. Here I am a part of the earth, part of the land, of the tree. I don't need Christmas tree here in the Knesset or in a public place. It bothered me. Okay, thank you.
Donna, you have the proposal there for the debate that I suggested.
Okay, well, yeah, there's obviously strong feeling here on both sides, but I'm in danger here of presenting a view that I'm not altogether so powerful for. However, I have to counter and say, just as Nechama saw menorahs when she was 20 odd years in America and we were guests there, which is correct, we have to accord the same hospitality as guests when we are in the majority. You can't have double standards. I'm not suggesting that they take over, and I'm not suggesting that we give away anything. But if we don't invite guests into our home, then we are in danger of having midat sdom. If we want to be guests elsewhere in the world, we have to afford guests into our home the same hospitality without being taken over in that regard. That's my view, and I'd be happy to debate that in due course.
Okay, Philip, just before you start, Ella, are you raising another point or is your hand still up from before? Okay, we're not sure there. Philip, go ahead.
Okay, Johnny, it seems to me that you didn't experience certain things. I lived in Europe. I lived in Antwerp, a bit like, you know, a bit like living in Berlin or in Vienna. It wasn't as bad, but when I was a young boy, I used to fight on the street with anti-Semites. Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost. Generally, I won. But fact is that I did have to fight people who called me a dirty Jew. You were never called a dirty Jew in England. But in many places in the world, unlike India, which was mentioned before, which is the only country in the world where there has been no anti-Semitism. In Japan, I lived in Japan, you know that. In Japan, the ignorance of the Japanese towards the Jews, although they did save their Jews in the Second World War, the Japanese, but the local populations, the people were so ignorant that in bookstores where you had you had kind of bookshelves with Jewish books, Jewish subjects. You had the Tanakh next to Mein Kampf, next to the translation of Mein Kampf, Johnny, because they thought that because Mein Kampf talked about the Jews, that it was Judaica. They were totally ignorant. Anti-Semitism is a sign of ignorance. There are a few anti-Semites in the world who are very, very educated. Just let me finish. I'm almost finished. Johnny, you recommend learning about comparative religion in Jewish schools. How about recommending learning comparative religions in non-Jewish schools all over the world? That's my question to you.
Okay, so first of all, that does occur. First of all, if you have a look at the curricula of the national curriculum in the UK, it includes comparative religion. I personally have been involved in teaching about Judaism to non-Jewish kids. My son, when he was in Liverpool, used to do lots of lessons in the non-Jewish schools, Catholic schools, interfaith stuff. It is correct that does go on, and it's right that goes on, because as you correctly say, Philip, ignorance is the cause of a great deal of the problem in the world, not just anti-Semitism. Ignorance in general is a cause of distress and a cause of hatred, because we hate the things that we are not familiar with. So yes, we should be having comparative religion across the board. I'm not suggesting that we have to be cully levels and just accept everything that comes along our way. No, we have to be firm about our beliefs, our religion, and about our hold on this land. I mean, nobody could accuse me of not being a Zionist. But if we are going to be so insular and so unwelcoming that we give succor to those who want to call us an apartheid state, then I think we're making a mistake. I think we need to be confident, we need to be strong, and we need to be tolerant at the same time. And the two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Well, this is a discussion that could go on forever, but...
Anybody want to raise any other different points? Otherwise, we will call it a night. Anybody hasn't spoken yet, want to say anything? Okay, all right, we've been going for almost over 2.25 hours. So that's, Johnny, first of all, that's a record. We've been doing these Melava Malkas last year and this year. We probably had 35 or 40 of them so far, the 2 years. This is a record, Rabotai. You obviously touched a nerve, but it's a nerve which is a nerve that welcome to be touched, I think. I think everybody really appreciates and values your stimulus, and some of the conversations that come out of that stimulus, I think, is very worthwhile. So again, I want to thank you very much. Johnny said he's got a transcript of his original presentation. Again, we have recorded everything. If anybody wants to watch this or part of it or distribute it else to other friends and so on, the recording will take a couple of hours to be prepared. I will distribute it as I usually do, and I'll send Johnny a copy and he can distribute it further. That will include all this discussion. That's a full 2.25 hours on a video format. So again, Shavua Tov, Johnny, we appreciate it very much. That was really, really stimulating. And thank you very much for spending the whole evening with both your community and ours together. We've said many times we should try and do more of these joint events. I know Avril is very active in our community in publicizing your activities, and we do appreciate that as well. So, okay, Shavua Tov, a reminder that
thanks everybody. Look forward to seeing you all again soon. Shavua Tov.
We'll be continuing on the Melava Malka series next week. And of course, also a reminder, there's the Monday Club this week as well, as usual. Shavua Tov, v'kulam.
Shavua Tov, everyone.
Great job, Johnny. Thanks.